We've seen how to subtract mixed numbers, but now we're going to take a step up and subtract mixed numbers where we're actually not able to directly subtract without having to do something special. So for example, we have this one which says 5 3/7 minus 4 5/7. If we actually write that, maybe it would be easier if I write it 1 on the top, 5 3/7, and we're subtracting the 4 5/7 underneath. So when we try to subtract, we should first subtract the fraction side. So if we say 3/7 minus 5/7, we notice that we can't actually subtract 5/7 from 3/7 because 5/7 are more sevenths than what 3/7 are. So we say, okay, maybe I need to have more sevenths on the top. How can I make more sevenths on the top? I can actually break the 5/7 down into 4 plus 1 or 4 plus 7/7. So I'm choosing sevenths because we're talking about sevenths here. Okay, so if I call that 4 plus 7, 4 7/7, that means I have 4 7/7 and another 3/7 makes 4 10/7. Is that clear? I put together this 4/7 here with this 3/7 here. Okay, because we already have, this is 4 3/7, 5 3/7, so that's 4 7/7, and another 3/7 makes 4 10/7. And then from that, I want to subtract 4 5/7. Nothing has changed here. We're looking at the fractions. Can we subtract those? Yes, we can. Immediately we can say 10/7 minus 5/7 leaves me 10 minus 5 is 5, 5/7. 4 minus 4 is nothing, 0. So my answer is just 5/7. Okay, let's have a look at another example now. Here we have 7 2/5 minus 2 3/5. So I'll write 1 on the top, the 7 2/5 basically, not just any one, minus 2 3/5. So again, we're trying to subtract here. If it subtracts straight away, that's brilliant. But if it doesn't, we're going to have to do the same as we did here. And what we did here is basically we borrowed. Okay, we borrowed 7/7 from that 5. Okay, we borrowed 1 from the 5 and it became a 4. So we're looking at this second one and we have 7 2/5 minus 7 2/5 minus 2 3/5. We're looking at the fractions and we're saying, well, I can't really do 2/5 minus 3/5. So again, I'm going to need to borrow here. We'll actually learn to spell borrow, double R. Okay, so I'm going to borrow 1 from this 7 here. Okay, so this is no longer, this is no longer going to be seen as 7, but 6 5/5. So we're talking about fifths this time. So this is my thought bubble, I'll say. Okay, so I'm saying this is 6 5/5, because 6 plus 1 is 7. Okay, so I now, instead of writing 7 2/5, I will write it as 6 5/5 plus another 2/5, 5/5 and 2/5 makes 7/5. And from here, I'm going to subtract 2 3/5. Okay, so we look at our fractions now. Are we able to subtract those? Yes, we are. 7/5 minus 3/5 is 7 minus 3 is 4, 4/5. And then we have 6 wholes minus 2 wholes is 4 wholes. So it's 4 4/5. My final answer. Let's move on to this one here. Example 3, we have 8 2/5. So I'll write it. 8 2/5. And from that, we would like to subtract 2 7/10. There we have it. So we work on the fractions first. The first thing we notice is we have 2/5 minus 7/10. We know that in order to subtract, the denominators need to be the same. In the previous two questions, the denominators were already the same from the start. Can you see they're both fifths here, and up here they were both sevenths. But down here we're looking and they're not actually the same denominators. So the first thing we need to do is make them the same denominators. So make the denominators the same. That's the first thing I'm going to do. Okay, so I'm looking at these two denominators. What's the lowest common denominator of 5 and 10? Now remember, the lowest common denominator cannot be less than the biggest one. Does 5 go into 10? Yes, it does. So 10 is my lowest common denominator. So I have here 8 and 2/5. I don't want fifths, I want tenths. Just like here, I want tenths in both of them. This one is cool because it's already tenths, so I can just write 7/10 there. But this one here I'm going to adjust. So I multiply the denominator by 2 in order to get tenths, and I'm going to do the same to the top. So 2 times 2 is 4, so that's 4/10. Now I am looking at the fraction side, and I'm saying 4/10 minus 7/10. Can I actually do that? If I can do that, then it's easy. I will just subtract. But I can't do it. I'm going to have to borrow, it seems, again. So I'm looking at this 8 here, and I'm saying instead of writing that as 8, I will write that as 7. So here I'm borrowing. Let me just label what I'm doing here. This is my next stage. I'm borrowing here. Okay, so I make them the same denominator if I need to, and then I borrow. Okay, so I'm going to write that 8 as 7 plus 10/10. Okay, so the 8 is 7 and 10/10. I'm now ready to write this as 8, not 8. A little bit of confusion there. We said it's 7, didn't we? So it's 7. 7 and 10/10. And we got the 4/10 here, so that's 14/10. 7 and 14/10 minus, we have the 2 and 7/10 here. So 2 and 7/10. Okay, so we subtract first. 14/10 minus 7/10 is 7/10. And then 7 minus 2 is 5. So 5 and 7/10 is my final answer. Okay, I always look at the answer and see if it simplifies. 7 and 10 doesn't simplify. They don't divide by something. Okay, let's move on to example 4. Here we have 12 and 1/6. Let's write it down. 12 and 1/6 minus 7 and 1/3. So we first look at the fraction side. 1/6 minus 1/3. Immediately we detect a problem. The denominators are not the same. So make the denominators the same. Is my first step. Okay, so we're looking at that 3 and that 6, and in order to make them the same, we have to make them both 6, because the 3 goes into 6, so that's the lowest common denominator. So make them both 6. This is already 6, really, isn't it? The first one. So 12, and it's already 1/6, and here we're going to make this 3 into a 6. We're going to multiply that by 2. Whatever I do to the denominator, I do to the numerator. 1 times 2 is 2. I then look at my fractions, because I need to actually subtract, now that they're the same. 1/6 minus 2/6. I cannot subtract 2 from 1. So I will actually have to borrow again. So my next step is to borrow. Okay, in order to borrow, I'm borrowing 1 from that 12. So that will become 11 and 6/6. 11 and 6/6 makes 12. I can just write it like that. I don't have to put the plus in between. So that's 11 and 6/6. Okay, so 11 and 6/6 plus this other sixth makes 11 and 7/6. And from that, I'm going to subtract my 7 and 2/6. So 7/6 minus 2/6 is 5/6. 11 minus 7 is 4. So we have 4 and 5/6. And we're now going to look at this last example. Here we have 3 and 2/5 minus 1 1/2. So 3 and 2/5 minus 1.5. So first of all, let's look at the fraction side. They're not the same denominators. The lowest common denominator of 5 and 2, what do they both go into? Okay, well, 5 is the biggest one. It cannot be smaller than the biggest denominator. 2 does not go into 5 exactly. So we say the 5 times table. 1 5 is 5, 2 5s are 10, 2 goes into 10. So tenths is what we want to make them both. Okay, on this one, sorry, not concentrating. Bad student. Right, on the second one, sorry, in this question, we're going to have to change both of them this time. So we'll change both of them. So we're going to make them into tenths. So what do I do to this 2 to make it into a 10? I multiply it by 5. I will do the same to the numerator. 1 times 5 is 5. What do I do to this 5 to make it into a 10? I times it by 2. So I do the same to the numerator. 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, am I ready to do my subtraction now? I'm looking at these fractions here. 4 tenths minus 5 tenths is not possible. So I'm going to have to borrow from here. I'm going to borrow. That's going to become a 2 plus 1 makes 3, or 2 plus 10 tenths. So 2 and 10 tenths. There's that one there. Okay, so we have, this is now 2 and 10 tenths plus these 4 tenths is 14 tenths. And minus 1 and 5 tenths. So we now have enough on the top now that we've borrowed. So 2 and 14 tenths minus 1 and 5 tenths. 14 tenths minus 5 tenths is 9 tenths. And 2 wholes minus 1 whole is 1 whole. So my final answer is 1 and 9 tenths. And that's about it. We'll just title these. Here we borrowed, and here we make the denominators the same. Right. That's it for now. That's all, folks. Bye.